So, deepfakes. They're getting easier and easier to make, and today we're talking about how, with the advance of AI, we'll be able to believe that what we see and what we hear is real, and what people who build software can do to help. My guest is Sam Gregory. He's the executive director of Witness, a nonprofit organization that helps citizens use video to foster social change. Witness has trained and supported citizen journalists since the days of the camcorder, through the smartphone era, and now into the world of AI. Sam is an expert on deepfakes, AI, and trust, and frequently advises governments and tech companies on how they can protect human rights and how we can preserve our shared reality. Welcome to Crafted, a show about great products and the people who make them. I'm Dan Blumberg.
Every time there's a technological evolution, we evolve, but at the heart of it is what you see is that when people are facing human rights violations, when they're trying to do community journalism, they turn to these tools that are available to them. And for the past few years, that's been smartphones, the mobile internet, and social media. And now it's increasingly inflected by AI. And our job is to make it as easy as possible for people to use those tools, to defend their rights, to document human rights violations, to tell compelling stories that create change, and to do that in a way that doesn't compromise their safety or the safety of the people around them.
The focus on deepfakes and the confusion that computer-generated and altered images can have is something you've been working on for years now. It's not a new thing for you. You've testified to Congress about it. Tell us more about the threat here and how you recommend we grapple with it.
Yeah, so we started working on deepfakes really early, actually. We were the first group in amongst civil society, nonprofits, to really say, we need to start thinking proactively about this. And the reason we said that was, of course, because we were deeply embedded in trying to think about what images, what videos you can trust and believe. And we also saw the very direct relationship to what was already happening to the people we work with, who are these frontline journalists and human rights defenders, right? Their stories aren't believed. They never have been. There was a proliferation of deceptive shallow fakes, miscontextualized videos, staged images already happening. And so it felt really important to lean into what does it mean to start to think about a deepfake world in which we prioritize, thinking about human rights concerns, thinking about the needs of this sort of frontline ecosystem of information that matters so much to our trust in understanding what's happening. And, over the past 7 years, what we've done is very proactively try and say, how do you bring together the people on the front lines of this? So that might be someone who's faced a non-consensual sexual image created with a deepfake. It might be a human rights defender who's documented war crimes and had them challenged. It might be a journalist who's saying, my audience no longer trusts the credibility of my information, and work with them to say, what is it we need as solutions? And of course, 7 years ago, for many people, it felt kind of hypothetical and we'd be explaining deepfakes. And now we're in the middle of, this sort of explosion of what's happening with them.
Yeah, well, we're recording this just after the U.S. election. How were deepfakes or cheap fakes used in this election, and what effect did they have, if any?
So this was a kind of a hyped up year for AI and elections, right? And as someone who's been in this world for the last 7 years, I've seen sort of news headlines probably every year or two that say AI deepfake's going to swing the election. So I have to admit, I came into the year with some skepticism, right? I think there are many more powerful forces that shape elections as it is now than AI. What we've seen, and we've run trainings for journalists, we've run the only global deepfakes rapid response force that enables people on the front lines, like journalists, to escalate a suspected deepfake to media forensics experts, is you've just seen this wide range of ways people are using AI, and particularly multimodal generative AI, so the ability to create images, video, audio. And it's across a spectrum. So like you have people using it in innovative ways to communicate, right? Politicians creating voice clones, creating image clones or video clones to increase the scope of their message, to break down barriers when they're behind bars. We've seen a lot of places, and I think this is where I've seen it most in the US context, where it's really about participation in your movement, your ideology. It's about creating memes. It's about creating satire, sometimes satire that edges over into deception. And we have seen it used to deceive, but I don't think quite as much as people sort of expected. We've always had this idea it was going to be like this incredibly sophisticated deepfake of a president as this kind of like image that everyone had of what a deepfake would look like.
Yeah.
And often it's been much more these audio clones, these lip sync dubs, which is an incredibly easy way we just make someone's lips match, a manipulated audio track. And then the final phenomenon, which we've grappled a lot with in this, in the rapid response force, is people claiming real footage is fake. And using the fact that the public has a very unclear sense of what is possible with AI to dismiss real footage that's compromising, be it an audio that has them saying something indicating corruption, being it a public speech they shouldn't have. And in the US context, that does tie into the trends towards just essentially denying facts, right? You now have AI as this sort of additional thing where you see an inconvenient photo and you can dismiss it and say, well, maybe AI made this.
Right. I mean, I will say actually the most arresting image of this entire political campaign was a real image. It was the one right after Trump was shot in the ear and he's got the blood down his face and the fist up and the American flag behind. I mean, it looks too perfect. It's almost like if you had AI make that, you'd say, no, take it back a notch. Like, that's too perfect.
Yeah, there's a great observation from Brendan Nyhan, who's a political scientist. He said, what AI has given us is the ability to turn a sentence of describing a metaphor into an image that captures it. And you're right, that's a very powerful, you can imagine it created by AI. The interesting thing about that is then people did AI manipulate that image for different narratives around it. For example, to misrepresent the female Secret Service agents in the image. So an image that is too good to be true almost, but then also gets manipulated with AI, which I think is a really helpful thing. A lot of what we're grappling with, and I think one of the challenges of trying to think about how we confront the malicious use of this is it's not people just using it to create whole cloth AI manipulation. It's like tweaking parts of reality. And do we know which parts of reality have been tweaked to meet different perspectives?
Yeah. And the other image that this one was AI generated was the little girl holding the puppy after Hurricane Helene, which was totally AI generated. But it sort of, people thought it felt right. And that's a whole different class.
And that's not new, right? But the ability to create images that feel right to any context is somewhat new. Like, we've seen it before. I remember, I've done a lot of work on human rights violations, and people constantly recycle images from different contexts across. They'll take an image of a atrocity in Myanmar and they'll claim it's from Kenya. And when you ask, and if you ask them, they say, well, it represents the reality of that violence. And what I think is more cloudy about it is the way in which people in power are like, it doesn't really matter whether it's real or not. I need to sort of just do that, and kind of giving license to blur that line. And I thought it was fascinating watching that story.
Yeah. I'd love to talk more about what AI is capable of today. You said audio it's remarkably capable and can fool people very easily. I think video is coming along very quickly, and Witness has a program called Prepare, Don't Panic. And I'd love to understand, what should we not be panicking about and how should we be preparing?
Yeah, and we've said prepare, don't panic for ever since we started. And there are many reasons to do that. Partly is because the public doesn't understand AI. And so people jump right into that sort of concern, the panic, and they manipulate it, right? On everything from, claiming that real images are fake to exploiting the panic for their own political goals. So we still believe in the prepare, don't panic. We also know that the technical trends are going in a direction that's going to make it harder to believe what we see here. The threats we see most, or the usages we see most, because I think some of these are creative and powerful. And as someone who cares about the creative power of video and audiovisual experience, some of it is tremendously exciting as well, right? It's not purely malicious or deceptive. The ones that are so broadly used now, of course, image generation, audio cloning, the lip sync dubbing that I described, where in the malicious use, it's making someone say something they never did. And of course, these video avatars that we see in corporate training videos, but are also used to simulate news anchors. When we look ahead, we've generally been saying we see 4 trends that we think are really important to pay attention to. One is, just an easier realism. All of this is getting more realistic. The kind of visual or audio glitches that people anticipated before are being eliminated, right? So easy realism. The increasing accessibility of video. I think there are still unresolved questions about how to actually commercialize video at scale that have not been solved, right? It's, a compute intensive task. There's a lot going on in doing video, but all the trend lines are to have more video, with all the risks that carry that are at the heart of the mission of Witness, right? About the viscerality of that, the kind of the way in which we receive video. We have less of a filter than we do with images or text. The third area that we pay a lot of attention to is personalization, right? The ability to think about this in a much more personalized way. And the way I think that's most captured for me at the moment is Meta saying that in your Facebook feed, we're going to generate AI images based on what you have in your feed. Sort of like they're going to add in more content that is personal to you, generated with AI, based on your feed, but just for you. So it's not like someone creating a meme and it landing in your feed because of the algorithm. It's content landing in your feed because your feed has content that they can create AI images off. So this very personalized, very directive creation side. And then the part that in the industry everyone's talking about, this idea of AI agents, having AI sort of do a set of tasks. And once you start to think about that, well, then you start to ask, what does that mean in terms of how they might create audio or visual or video content? And how might that play out in terms of both malicious and positive usages? And so as I look at the next 2 years, what I see is this technological growth that's going to make it harder on the front lines. And we've got to build the resiliency there. And then this window of opportunity that we have to take advantage of. It's going to be a flawed window, right? Like it's not clear, like, what an incoming Republican administration in the US will do on AI. The EU is moving forward, but there is a window in which we need to make sure that we create an AI infrastructure that, yes, supports innovation and creativity, but also protects rights and enables you and I, when we encounter AI communication, to be able to really know when it's trying to deceive us and when we're just enjoying it because it's part of daily life.
Yeah. What are some recommendations that you have for people who are actually making this software in the first place?
Yeah. I'm a strong advocate that responsibility around this has to sit across the whole pipeline of people involved in this, right? We can't blame, individuals for not spotting this. We can't solely blame platforms for not moderating this. We have to think about folks building tools, folks building the models, people building the training data sets as part of this if we're going to address this in a holistic way. So very concretely, a few things that I think are really important if you're doing this. There are some shared concerns that are across, doing work in AI about whether you've built a robust training data set that's free of bias and that's really apt for the purpose. I'll give an example there. If you're building a detection tool, and you're hoping that it's going to be useful for people who speak English with a whole range of accents around the world, have you actually built in Indian accented English and Nigerian accented English if you're hoping this is going to be a global product, right? So bias is both obviously a fundamental issue, but also a very practical issue of how do you build tools that really work for the people you wanted. The second is for people who are building the tools that might be around creating this is like, have you made it as easy as possible to detect that what you're creating is synthetic? I think in 99.9% of use cases, you're not trying to deceive the public. You're not trying to persuade people that something synthetic is real if they really need to know, right? You're hoping they'll have a better user journey. They'll have a better experience interacting with a chatbot. They'll see more convincing images or more compelling video. So making it as detectable as possible, right? Leaving the signals in there that can be easily read, that something has been synthesized with AI, or building in the types of sort of structured provenance approaches that are increasingly being demanded, right, by regulation. And then the third part is, to really responsibly do red teaming with people who can anticipate some of the risks. Like, there are folks like Witness, there are many people in the civil society and technical space who've started to think, how do we do this in a really robust way? And again, I think the lesson learned from my experience is, we're in a global marketplace. Most people are trying to sell products outside of just, one geography, is to think globally about the impacts, right? The ways in which someone may misuse an AI tool are different in an authoritarian regime. They're different in some contexts globally than they are in the US or Europe, right? Yeah. So it's about that attentiveness as well to the surroundings.
I want to get a level deeper on technically how you verify a piece of content and watermark, or the ways that you prove provenance. Can you explain what is it that actually needs to be done to prove this is fake, this is real, this is AI has been used, but only in this particular way? Like, how is that actually done, and how effective are those tools?
Yeah. So, I think there's two things we're talking about here. One is after the fact detection, if you've not really invested the effort to make something detectable before. And then the second is, how do you create these sort of robust elements of transparency as you create AI? So on the after the fact detection, and this is what we largely do in our Deepfakes rapid response force, really what you're generally trying to do is apply a whole bunch of different methods that come out of both traditional media forensics, but also out of machine learning and AI, to work out whether you can spot something as completely synthesized or has signs of manipulation. The challenge at the moment is that any one of those tools generally doesn't work for every way you can create an AI piece of media, doesn't work at 100% certainty, even with really clean media, and doesn't work tremendously well in the real world where people both, share media that's compressed, there's background noise, or they deliberately use sort of counter forensics techniques because they're trying to deceive. I think what we've seen is, like in our work, if you can get to 80 or 90% certainty with a combination of those techniques, that's about as far as you get in the real world. Yeah. And then you've got to find a way to explain that to a skeptical public. So in the messy real world, detection doesn't work fully, but it's still very necessary. The other technical side is this idea of sort of provenance architecture. This is basically showing people the recipe of how AI was used in a piece of media or communication construction, right? What tool was used? How was it used to change something? Potentially who did it, right? At different stages. If you think about a video, you edit with AI and you change one bit of it, right. You blur a face, you change the background. Those are all discrete changes, perhaps to a piece of authentic content. That world, it's very highly hyped at the moment because of the desire to find something that works at a scaled way. And it's also really necessary because we need those sort of robust foundations to be able to discern what is AI and where. And we need it also because it's increasingly demanded by regulation. So you have a sort of a combination now of how does the technology and the need catch up with a recognition of that need, both by the public and by regulators. And there's a number of ways to do that approach. I've been deeply involved in one process called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA. That involves a lot of the significant companies in this space, as well as NGOs and startups. And there it's trying to come up with a way that you have a set of metadata that travels with a piece of media that sort of describes that recipe, and is sometimes correlated to a couple of the other techniques out there. So people often hear the word watermarking, and that's kind of a very durable signal you might put into a piece of AI media at a certain point. And fingerprinting, which is what we do now around things like child sexual abuse imagery. Once you find one example of it, you do a hash of that piece of media so you can then find it if it recirculates. Yeah. So we're going to end up with some kind of architecture that enables us to see the recipe of when AI is used. And I think the key questions that I ask as I work on that, and all our work in this C2PA coalition, was about the potential harms from it, right? You want to make sure that you're really talking about what could go wrong, is to make sure you build that kind of system in a way that's accessible, that is human rights protecting, privacy protecting, available to people all around the world. So it's getting that right that is, the key challenge with that technology in the big picture.
You mentioned red teaming and sort of asking these questions of, like, not a fun question to ask, but like what could go wrong? And what are some examples of those kinds of questions that people should be asking as they're building different tools that, might be used in ways they didn't expect?
Yeah, I think it's good to think of the way you assess for misuse at two levels. One is the really sort of product specific one. And if you look at red teaming, say for an image generator, you're probably red teaming, like, can this be used to create images of gore? Can it be used for hate speech, right? If you've decided as a company those are not acceptable, or you're in a jurisdiction that doesn't allow it, right? So there's one level of red teaming that's really sort of specifically about kind of very manifest sort of almost product harms. I think there's another layer back that most AI companies really haven't done yet, which in a lot of more mainstream businesses, people do, called a human rights impact assessment. That's much more taking a step back and saying, when we put this product in the market, what are the kind of bigger contextual implications of it? Is this going to make it harder for some people to be able to speak out? Is it going to make it have effects on the privacy of a broad range of people in this geography? Is it going to have impacts in terms of discrimination because some people are going to be well represented in the data set and thus well represented in the solution or in the representation? And there are generally, AI companies have got better at the red teaming part of it, right? And there's, developing a model card as a company like OpenAI might do around the release of, the next version of their tools. What I think is we also need that step back, and that's particularly true when we're building the infrastructure here. When we're looking at like what might be a generalized way to understand the recipe of AI in a piece of media, we really need to do that kind of human rights impact assessment early on, because otherwise you end up 5 years down the line realizing You came up with, a potential tool for surveillance, or one that's not accessible to people who use open source tools, or one that doesn't work so well in environments where there's less access to compute or data, etc., whatever it might be.
What are some things about AI that you're excited about?
Yeah, I have a complicated relationship to AI because, and particularly audiovisual, multimodal generative AI, because at the heart of Witness's work, and even my own like sort of personal history, is coming into it as a creator, as a documentary maker, and seeing how people want to create audiovisual content, want to be able to do that in more diverse, easy, accessible ways. And as we've talked to human rights defenders and journalists and creators around the world, they want to use it in ways that would enable them to reach more people, to do it in compelling ways, and also to do some of the fundamentals of like human rights and investigative journalism, like protect people. Like you can use AI to make it much easier to protect the identity of someone, but not dehumanize them, right? Like you can use face swaps and audio to like make it so much easier for that witness in a corruption case or witness to a human rights violation to speak super specific, but like so core to how you have, the ability to speak out in a visual age. We've also been seeing people really experimenting with AI as a way to do the type of complex work to reconstruct situations, visualize, do what's called open source investigations in ways that actually proves reality, right? So when someone denies that, a missile strike took place, you have these set of expertise, and AI can, fast track the ability to actually prove reality, right? So in the same way that it's being used as a counterbalance to undermine reality, we can use it to do this fortification of the truth. And then I've seen a lot of interest, and I think we're seeing this in the fact-checking world that's very adjacent to where I work, in people having control of small language models, using them to get accessibility to information, both to do fact checks, but also, in indigenous communities to say, look, there are ways here, if we control the data, we might be able to use this in ways that help us access our own information. So I don't think it's, I don't believe that AI is inherently a negative conception, or generative AI. And even in, the niche context where I work of like protecting identity, visualizing and protecting the reality of human rights violations, people see a real power. And they also see a real power in, just making it easier to create a video, right? It's fundamentally, as someone who's been in the video space for 30 years, watching like how much easier it's got, like going from like a $200,000 machine, and a tape to a DVD to streaming video to a cell phone to live streaming to a text prompt, right? For both editing and creation. There are positive things about that in terms of creativity and expressiveness.
Yeah. Tell me more about Witness's work away from AI and training people to actually capture, real images, real video on the ground. I know there's a lot of, best practices, and you've had, a long history of training folks.
Yeah, at the heart of our work is, what is it that you need to show reality on the ground? And very concretely, it can mean a whole bunch of things. Like I think about, like we were talking about missile strikes, right? Which, there are many groups documenting those in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, before that in Yemen, in Syria, in Sudan, right? And there, you're really trying to help people think, what is it I need to do in a skeptical world to create information that shows the evidence of what occurred? And so it can be as simple as, for example, when you're documenting the on the ground site of, a missile strike, doing 360, right? You show the entire surroundings, so you can also see the landmarks. You can also challenge someone saying that it's being faked, because it's a lot harder to fake the 360. It's filming from multiple points around something. So some of it is really almost procedural about how you film. And then there are other parts that are about actually saying something like, well, how do I archive this and hold on to it? Because we're realizing that more and more, it's not just what you do in the moment. It's like, how do you archive it? How do you hold on to it? And of course, there AI plays a role as well. If we're going to actually be able to protect, the record of what's happened, you have to have good archives, right? And you have to have good archives that you can say, well, we know what it looked like when we recorded it on July 1st, 2025, when someone in July 1st, 2029 says, I have a completely different version of reality from that day, because they have a perfect video that shows something completely different. So we try to stay very grounded in it.
Over your 25 years at Witness, what are some of the most important or memorable moments?
The most memorable are often the victories that people we work with achieve. We worked with human rights defenders in the Congo who, filmed the evidence of child soldiers, which then ended up as part of a conviction at the International Criminal Court, right? Those kinds of very concrete victories. I think there's also parts of it that are about seeing where we've influenced the infrastructures that we know will have this determinative effect. So, I'm proud of the work we've done around deepfakes because I think we've helped shape some of the technologies that will be determinative, whether you can trust the child or the grandchild of that man who filmed the child soldiers in the Congo, because he'll be able to create videos that you can trust and say, I know that was filmed in that village. I know it was filmed on that date. I know it wasn't manipulated or synthesized. And, so I think for me, it's always that balance of those two types of things that matter. The motivating thing, and I think it's motivating for me and a lot of my colleagues, is there are both the expected allies in this space. It's tremendous to work with human rights defenders. There's just, you have to have a deep well of courage to do this work ongoing because the world is not all that hospitable. Yeah. But there are also unexpected allies. Like I've spent a lot of time talking to engineers and technologists who really want to do the right thing. And often it's just they don't spend their life experience engaging with what it's like to be a human rights defender, who may be the most critical user of that tool they build, and they may never know what their experience was of it, or they may learn too late. They build a tool or a technology and they realize 10 years on that actually it didn't work that great for that set of people who they probably did care about. So I find that very motivating to see both those sets of interest and engagement in making sure that we can still trust the reality of what occurs when people violate the rights of others.
We've talked about a lot of scary things today. Yeah. What is it that makes you optimistic? A
note of optimism. I think the people in my community are alert to what is going on here. And what I mean by that is like social media kind of caught us unawares, right? The whole social media landscape kind of landed on the globe, and many of the people I work with, and they were like, wait a second, who designed that and where does it come from? It's not that I think at the moment that everyone in AI is listening to me or to my peers or to the groups we work with, but the people I work with are much more focused. The battle is clearer. The desire to make this work for everyone is clearer. So I'm optimistic that we've sort of got the right people at the table to start having this fight. And maybe it's not a fight, getting this right? Yeah. Which may involve fighting, may involve compromising, may involve, just talking it through and getting it right. So I'm trying to be pragmatically optimistic about that we've got the right people coming to the table increasingly, that we're not behind the curve as we were with social media. But it's pragmatic because I also know the world is pretty shit for a lot of the people I work with right now. And I don't want to be falsely optimistic about the bigger picture in which AI lands, which sort of takes us back to that conversation about, AI is kind of like fuel on the flames in a lot of contexts for these problems around, societal trust, about governments attacking their citizens, around threats to privacy. And so I hope we can fix AI, but we're going to have to do it in this bigger picture of all those other problems that are around it.
Yeah. Where can people learn more about you, learn more about Witness?
Yeah, so witness.org is our website. And we also have a specific website on Gen AI issues, gen/ai.witness.org. We're always keen to engage with collaborators and people in this space, right? This is going to be a space we build together if we want it to be rights respecting.
Sam, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with us about all these hard things.
Yeah, thank you.
Crafted is produced by Modern Product Minds, where my team and I can help you take a new product from 0 to 1 and beyond. Learn more at modernproductminds.com. And please help Crafted grow, subscribe to the show, tell a friend, and sign up for the Crafted newsletter at crafted.fm.